There is a quiet irony that often follows intelligent men. As perception sharpens, victories feel less like triumphs and more like isolation. What once looked like admiration from others gradually becomes misunderstanding, sometimes even disappointment. Real intelligence rarely presents itself as charm. It doesn't shine in social brightness, it works in silence, in corners of thought where most people do not linger. It reveals rather than flatters. And what it reveals is not always comfortable. Kierkegaard described a similar tension as the conflict between what a person truly is and what the world pressures them to perform. When a man begins to live by clarity instead of illusion, he becomes difficult to place. He no longer fits easily into expectations, especially in relationships built partly on emotional projection and partly on fantasy. At first, depth can feel compelling. He listens with unusual focus, speaks with intention, and carries a stillness that feels meaningful. His presence can feel rare, even grounding. But over time, that same stillness can be misread. What once seemed like mystery begins to feel like distance. Inside his mind, everything is examined. Even emotion is observed as it forms. He tries to understand affection while it is still alive, and in doing so, he sometimes weakens its spontaneity. Awareness becomes both his strength and his limitation. He cannot fully return to innocence once he has seen how perception shapes feeling. Where others remain inside experience, he often steps outside it to analyze it. Love, to him, stops being only feeling and becomes structure, pattern, contradiction. That shift makes emotional simplicity harder to sustain. What feels natural to others becomes something he studies. In relationships, this creates tension. He notices patterns in closeness and distance, in how emotion rises and fades, and once seen, those patterns are difficult to ignore. What might have once been experienced freely now gets filtered through interpretation. Kierkegaard also pointed to a deeper paradox: awareness of the self can create a kind of internal division. The more a person observes themselves, the harder it becomes to simply be. For an intelligent man, even love can become something partially lived and partially analyzed. He may want sincerity without illusion, truth without distortion, connection without dependency. But most relationships rely on some degree of emotional unawareness, a shared space where not everything is examined too closely. When that space disappears, tension replaces ease. What others sometimes interpret as emotional distance is often not absence of feeling, but an excess of reflection. He is not necessarily detached, he is observant. And observation changes participation. As this continues, misunderstandings grow. One person may seek emotional spontaneity, while the other responds with restraint and analysis. What was once attraction can shift into frustration, not because either person lacks feeling, but because they operate from different emotional logics. Over time, the intelligent man learns something difficult: clarity does not always preserve connection. Seeing things accurately does not guarantee they will remain intact. In some cases, it accelerates their unraveling. He begins to understand that many people do not only seek truth in relationships, but also comfort, reassurance, and emotional resonance that is not interrupted by analysis. When that expectation is not met, distance often follows. Yet intelligence also brings its own burden. Once patterns are recognized, it becomes difficult to return to ignorance. Even emotional moments carry an echo of awareness. Nothing feels entirely unfiltered anymore. After loss or separation, reflection replaces reaction. He replays conversations, examines subtle shifts in tone, and searches for meaning in what was said and what was left unsaid. This can turn understanding into a cycle that delays emotional release rather than resolves it. But with time, something shifts. The same awareness that once created tension begins to create stability. He stops trying to force emotional certainty out of uncertain experiences. Instead of seeking control over what others feel, he begins to accept that not everything is meant to be decoded into resolution. Kierkegaard suggested that real maturity begins when understanding reaches its limit and acceptance takes its place. Not the abandonment of thought, but the recognition that thought cannot solve everything. From there, the need to overinterpret slowly weakens. Silence becomes less threatening. Uncertainty becomes tolerable. An emotional experience is no longer treated like a problem to solve, but something to live through. This change alters how he moves through life. There is less reaction, less urgency to prove or be understood. Words become fewer, but more deliberate. Presence becomes quieter, but more grounded. And in that quiet, something changes in how he is perceived. Not through performance, but through steadiness. People notice less what he is trying to show, and more what he is no longer trying to prove. What once felt like emotional distance is now seen differently. Not as absence, but as self-possession. Not as coldness, but as restraint. In the end, intelligence does not guarantee easier relationships. It often complicates them. But it does offer something else, the ability to remain intact when illusions fall away, and to find a form of peace that does not depend on being fully understood.